Gen X was taught to be strong so early that nobody noticed they were disappearing. They were the kids who came home to empty houses, made their own snacks, kept their own secrets, and learned very quickly that if something hurt, they were expected to handle it quietly. They were praised for being independent, admired for being low maintenance, and trusted to figure things out on their own. From the outside, that sounds like resilience. It sounds like freedom. It sounds like a generation raised to be tough. But beneath that image was a quieter truth, one that still follows many of them today. For a lot of Gen X, strength was never really a choice. It was an adaptation, and what looked like maturity was often emotional abandonment wearing a respectable face. That is why so many Gen X adults now sit inside their own families and feel strangely invisible, loved in theory, needed in practice, but somehow never fully known. What makes this pain so confusing is that it rarely looks dramatic. Gen X is not usually the generation that announces its hurt. They are not always the ones demanding attention, calling out the unfairness, or putting words to every emotional wound. They learned long ago that survival often depends on reading the room, staying useful, and not becoming one more problem for other people to manage. So the pain becomes subtle. It becomes the feeling of being present at family gatherings, while somehow feeling emotionally absent. It becomes the experience of being the one everyone relies on, but no one really checks on. It becomes the quiet ache of realizing that the people who know your history may not actually know you at all. And that is the mystery at the center of this story. How does someone become essential to the family, yet still feel like a ghost inside it? The answer begins in childhood, because Gen X was raised in a cultural atmosphere that rewarded emotional restraint. Many of them grew up during a time when children were expected to adapt, not be centered. Adults were busy, stressed, distracted, working, divorcing, surviving, and often emotionally unavailable in ways that were considered normal. Children were told to go outside, stay out of the way, come back by dinner, and not make too much noise unless something was truly on fire. Emotional needs were rarely treated as urgent. If you were fed, clothed, and physically safe enough, then the rest was often dismissed as oversensitivity. And so many Gen X children absorbed the same lesson again and again: need less, ask for less, feel less visibly, become easy to carry, or better yet, carry yourself. That lesson creates a very specific kind of child. Not always the rebellious one, not always the broken one that outsiders notice, but the quiet adapter. The child who learns how to sense tension before it explodes. The child who knows when not to ask for comfort, because the adults are already overwhelmed. The child who gets praised for being mature when what is really happening is premature emotional self-containment. The child who hears things like, "You are so easy, you never give us trouble, you are so independent," and slowly begins to understand that being easy is what makes them lovable, that being self-sufficient turns approval, that being invisible keeps the peace. Over time, this child stops expecting emotional attunement. They stop assuming someone will notice the sadness behind the silence. They become functional, capable, and strangely alone. This is why Gen X was often raised to need less, and that matters more than most people realize. Quiet children are often mistaken for healthy children. Self-sufficient children are often mistaken for secure children. But a child can appear independent and still be profoundly emotionally unseen. A child can stop asking, not because they no longer need comfort, but because they have learned that needing comfort leads nowhere. That is the hidden wound. It is not always obvious neglect. It is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is a long pattern of emotional non-response, so consistent that the child learns to disappear before anyone has to turn away. And when that pattern repeats for years, it stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like identity. That is where the second part of the story begins, because for many Gen Xers, survival replaced connection. They learned how to cope, but not always how to be held. They learned how to function, but not always how to express. They learned how to endure discomfort without falling apart, but not how to expect care when they needed it. This creates adults who can handle enormous amounts of responsibility, yet still feel deeply uncomfortable with vulnerability. They know how to show up. They know how to fix problems. They know how to be dependable, but they may not know how to let themselves be fully seen, because being seen once felt dangerous, disappointing, or pointless. In many cases, emotional closeness was never modeled as something stable. It was inconsistent, awkward, or simply absent. So competence became the substitute for intimacy. Then comes the family role, the one that hardens all of this into something permanent. Every family has roles, spoken or unspoken. There is the fixer, the peacekeeper, the responsible one, the one who does not complain, the one who always comes through. For Gen X, these roles often formed early and then followed them into adulthood. Families tend to freeze people in the version of them that was most useful. So even decades later, the person who once kept quiet to avoid becoming a burden is still treated as the one who will be fine, the one who can handle it, the one who does not need much. The family does not always update its understanding because the old role remains convenient, and the more capable Gen X becomes, the easier it is for others to assume they are untouched by the emotional cost of carrying everyone else. This is the trap of becoming the stable one. Stability attracts dependence, but it does not guarantee recognition. In fact, it often reduces it. People notice the ones who fall apart, the ones who make demands, the ones whose pain interrupts the room. But the one who keeps the room stable often disappears into the background. Their labor becomes expected, their calm becomes taken for granted, their sacrifices become routine, and eventually they are loved not as a fully visible person, but as a function, as the one who remembers birthdays, makes the calls, shows up in crises, keeps conversations from collapsing, handles the logistics, swallows the discomfort, and remains emotionally legible to everyone else while staying emotionally unreadable themselves. That is why so much of Gen X pain stays invisible. There was no dramatic rebellion for many of them, no obvious breakdown, no loud declaration that something was wrong. Their pain looked like normalcy. It looked like composure. It looked like being the one who could always cope. So nobody looked deeper, and if someone never learns to signal pain in a way that others recognize, then their suffering can remain hidden for years, even from the people closest to them. This is part of why a family gathering can feel so lonely for a Gen X adult. Everyone is there. The history is there. The familiar faces are there. But emotional recognition is missing. They are surrounded by people who know the facts of their life, yet still fail to see the private cost of who they had to become. Psychologically, this is what emotional neglect often does. It does not always shatter the self in obvious ways. Sometimes it thins the self out. It teaches a person to become less visible, less demanding, less emotionally expressed, until they are easier for others to be around. Invisibility becomes adaptive. Self-erasure starts to feel like maturity. Suppression starts to feel like strength. And because this pattern helped them survive childhood, it can feel deeply disloyal to question it later. Many Gen X adults carry an identity built around being solid, practical, and dependable, yet beneath that identity is a quieter grief. The grief of never being fully mirrored, the grief of becoming who the family needed, while losing contact with who they actually were. This pain often intensifies in midlife, and that is not a coincidence. Midlife forces reflection. It is the stage where old roles become harder to maintain without consequence. Aging parents may need more support. Adult children may unintentionally mirror the same emotional distance they once experienced. Siblings may still interact. Through old family scripts, responsibilities grow, but emotional returns often do not. And suddenly, the old adaptation that once felt efficient starts to feel unbearable. The strong one becomes exhausted. The dependable one starts to notice how little comfort flows back toward them. The peacekeeper begins to feel the cost of a lifetime spent minimizing their own needs. What once felt normal starts to feel empty, and that emptiness can be terrifying because it reveals just how long invisibility has been mistaken for love. But this is also where healing begins, because the first shift is not dramatic. It starts with naming the pattern, realizing that this is not just personality. It is not just preference. It is not simply that Gen X is naturally distant, naturally private, or naturally tough. Much of this was learned. Much of it was built in response to family dynamics that rewarded self-containment and overlooked emotional need. Once that becomes visible, something important changes. The old role loses some of its authority. The person can begin to ask a new question. If disappearing was learned, can it be unlearned? Healing does not mean becoming someone completely different. It does not mean abandoning strength, responsibility, or resilience. It means separating strength from suppression. It means learning that having needs does not make you weak, difficult, or selfish. It means understanding that peace built on self-erasure is not peace at all. For many Gen X adults, healing looks like allowing themselves to become emotionally legible, speaking before resentment hardens, asking for support without apologizing for existing, noticing where they still perform the old family role, and gently refusing to disappear inside it. It can also mean grieving, because there is real grief. In recognizing how much of your identity was built around adaptation, there is grief in realizing that people may have loved you and still failed to know you. That grief matters because it clears space for something new. Once invisibility is no longer romanticized as maturity, a different life becomes possible. A life where being dependable is not the same as being emotionally unavailable. A life where being calm does not require being numb. A life where family roles are questioned, boundaries are allowed, and the self is no longer reduced to usefulness. This is not easy work, especially for a generation that learned long ago to survive by needing little and saying less. But it is necessary work because the ghost feeling does not disappear on its own. It fades only when the person who was trained to vanish begins choosing visibility instead. Gen X feels like a ghost in their own family, not because they imagined it, and not because they are too sensitive to handle reality. They feel like a ghost because, for a long time, disappearing was what kept the family comfortable. It was what earned praise. It was what preserved connection, even if that connection came at the cost of the self. But the deepest truth is this: what was learned in silence can be challenged in awareness. What was built through emotional neglect can be rebuilt through emotional honesty. And the generation that was taught to survive without being seen can still learn that they were always worthy of more than being useful. They were worthy of being known.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं, ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं, तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है, दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर बढ़ता है। अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं, ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं, तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है, दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दर्द भरता है। मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं, तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं। कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा, तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू, मेरी रूह का मका तू, लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था, वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था। सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा, मगर खामोश है दुनिया, कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा। बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत, मुझे है आज भी तेरी वफा की सख्त जरूरत। साए मेरे तन्हा बस रह गया दर्द का असर। हंसाए मेरे तन्हा सफर, बस रह गया दर्द का असर, दर्द का असर।